Yes. What's up, guys? This is Blue from Bacon Airsoft, and today we're going to be disassembling an ICS CXP, specifically the MARS edition. So ICSs are extremely easy to disassemble compared to other version 2, like standard Marui clone version 2 M4s, and we're going to see this. So the first thing you want to do is, of course, make sure that your magazine's out, the weapon's cleared, and your battery is disconnected. And the next thing is popping out this rear pin right here, and the only tools you're going to need for the entire disassembly are a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver and number 1 or a slightly smaller Phillips head screwdriver. So very simple in that aspect. So you want to pop that rear pin a little bit, pull it the rest of the way out, and then the MARS is going to split in half like this. Once you get that down, pop that front pin, pull it all the way out, and the upper and lower will completely separate. So we're going to examine the upper half of the gearbox first and how to disassemble it. So from here, the charging handle just lifts off, and there's going to be 2 small screws. This is what you're going to need the number 1 or slightly smaller Phillips head screwdriver for. Just take out those 2 small screws, and it's a good idea to have a magnet or something similar nearby so that you can put all of your screws in place or somewhere where you're not going to end up losing them. Actually, the motor of an airsoft gun works well because it has relatively strong magnets. At least a motor with neo magnets will. So I'm going to set that off to the side. Next, there are 4 Phillips head screws here, but the first thing you're going to want to do is actually take out the, for this specific model, this is not across all of the CXP lines. This is where the MARS is a little bit unique. It has the quick change spring upper. So you're going to want to take an Allen key and push that quick change spring in a little bit, turn it about 45 degrees or so, and remove the spring. For a normal CXP upper, for any ICS version 2 upper gearbox that does not have the quick change spring, whenever you take this apart, it's going to need a little bit of love whenever the spring comes out. You're going to need to make sure you're holding the spring in place so that it doesn't just go flying. So you're going to need to take a number 2 Phillips head screwdriver and remove these 4 screws. And then, pushing down on the cylinder, you can lift the upper half off. And you can work your way out and examine the piston, piston head, cylinder, cylinder head, nozzle, tappet plate, etc. Now onto the lower portion, which is a little bit more complicated, but not much. So with the lower portion of the gearbox, the first thing you're going to need to do is, whenever it's in its stock setup anyway, the wires are going to be run through the bottom of the buffer tube so that you keep more of the space, more of the battery space within the buffer tube. On this specific version, the fuse came disconnected from the wire. So there are 3 Phillips head screws down here on the bottom. The 3rd one is hidden underneath this little rubber pad. So just take something, pry that rubber pad off, and remove these 3 Phillips heads. And whenever you remove these 3 Phillips head screws, the bottom portion of the buffer tube will just lift right off, like so. And then the wiring can come out, and next up, you take out the, the mag release. And this is another thing you're going to need your number 1 Phillips or smaller screwdriver for. Just remove that little screw. And that lifts out. And this is something specifically that I would recommend going ahead and putting the spring back on top of the mag catch and the button on top, and going ahead and turning that screw a few times to keep that all together, because those are very small parts and really easy to lose. Next up, the motor grip. There's 2 screws here. Do not mess with the middle screw. That's the motor height adjustment screw. Just leave that where it is. So you're going to remove the 2 Phillips head screws. Some of these are a little bit stickier than they are after they've been worked on for a few times, because they use a little bit of soft Loctite to keep them from wiggling out. And the 2 wires right here, you don't have to use needle nose pliers for it, but I typically do. Just grab the wires near where they connect to the motor and gently pull them up. Those are 2 things that can break very easily just because of the nature of the beast. The thin metal bends rather easily, and the more it bends, the weaker it gets. And there will be 2 Phillips head screws in the motor grip that go into the lower gearbox. Go ahead and unscrew those 2. And then the motor grip will lift directly off. Once this is done, the lower portion of the gearbox will push up. You may need to put the fire selector in like semi-automatic, and it'll push up and out. And then the wiring portion, you are going to need to remove the screw from the rear end of the buffer tube, and that's something that you could probably do a couple of steps earlier than I did. You'll need a long Phillips head screwdriver, but there's a screw at the very end of the buffer tube that you need to unscrew. Once this is done, that will lift off, and it is important to note, if you're running the fuse box still, you'll need to pull the fuse out so that that entire assembly is small enough to fit through the hole. That'll work. I'm not too worried about preserving the wiring harness because we're putting a new gate Titan MOSFET in here, so it's going to be all replaced anyway. And then remove the rear sling plate, and on this you'll see that's where the MOSFET goes. And the lower gearbox slides out. With the lower gearbox, there are 4 Phillips head screws that you're going to have to remove, and also actually we're going to have to figure out what the deal is with the fire selector gears, because this is the first MARS that I've had the privilege of taking apart. Go ahead and remove these 4 Phillips head screws. So it's not going to lift off, so there is going to be, we're going to need to pop off one of these two gears that are on the lower gearbox shell. So you can see. We may need to get a thinner flathead screwdriver. Yeah, so that's coming off. Just take a thinner flathead screwdriver, work it under there, and it'll pop off. And then, very carefully, you want to make sure that whenever you lift the upper half of the gearbox off, that you don't mess anything up, because the shims are going to probably stay stuck to either the gear axles or the bushings, and you want to leave those like they are. And then you can analyze the gears and taking out the trigger contacts, whatever you need to. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the full disassembly of the ICS CXP MARS, and we'll see you all next time.